When was the last time she came into the room and said, "You won't believe what happened today"? When was the last time she started a sentence with, "Wait, listen to this"? When was the last time she leaned in across the kitchen counter and told you a story about a co-worker or a strange thing on the street or what she dreamed about last night? If you have to think hard to find the answer, if it takes you more than a few seconds to remember, pay attention, because something is happening in your relationship that almost no man notices in time. And it isn't that she's busier. It isn't that the kids take up more space. It isn't that you're both tired now in a way you weren't before. She stopped telling you about her day, and the worst part is, you can't remember exactly when she stopped, because there was never a day she announced it. There was no fight. There was no breakdown. There was just one ordinary week, sometime in the last year or two, when something quietly closed inside her. And you didn't notice because on the surface, nothing actually changed. This video is going to walk you through 7 things that happened in her body, her mind, and her heart in the months and years leading up to that quiet closing. By the end, you'll understand what almost no man understands until much later. That the most important conversations in a long-term relationship aren't the dramatic ones. They're the small ones, the guess-what ones. The 10-minute ones where nothing important is being said. And when those go away, what's actually leaving the room is the entire mechanism by which she was still trying to feel like she belonged to you. The 7th thing I'm going to give you is an experiment you can try tonight, in your own kitchen, in less than a minute. It's the cleanest test there is for what stage you're in, and it gives you a practical first move that almost no man thinks of. Stay until the end. Before we keep going, listen. I'm not here to make you feel like a bad partner. The fact that you're watching this, that you noticed something might be off, that you wanted to understand instead of explain it away, already separates you from most men who lived through exactly this and didn't see it until it was too late. So put any defensiveness aside. This isn't an accusation. This is the translation no one ever gave you. Let's start with what those daily, useless-feeling conversations were actually for. There's a researcher named Shelly Gable at the University of California who spent years studying something psychologists now call capitalization. The word sounds clinical, but the meaning is simple. It's what happens when one person tells another person about something. Anything, big or small, good or bad, important or completely trivial, and how the listener responds. What Gable's research showed, in study after study, is something that surprises most men when they hear it. The response to good and small everyday news from your partner is a stronger predictor of long-term relationship satisfaction than the response to her bad news in a crisis. Read that again in your head. How you respond to her telling you a funny thing the cashier said this morning matters more over time than how you respond to her getting laid off. This sounds backwards, but it makes sense the moment you understand what those small disclosures actually were. When she walked into the kitchen and said, "You'll never guess what happened," she wasn't telling you a story. She was running an experiment. She was testing the line of connection between the two of you. She was asking, in a way she couldn't quite formulate consciously, "Are you still in this with me? Am I still someone whose tiny, unimportant moments are worth telling you? Do I still get to be visible to you on this level?" If you turned toward her, if you looked up, if you asked a follow-up question, if you laughed, if you said, "Wait, what did she actually say?" The line was intact. The experiment succeeded. The relationship just got a tiny deposit in a place she had no other way to put money. If you turned away, if you gave a one-word answer, if you didn't look up from your phone, if you said, "Uh-huh," without actually hearing, if you changed the subject, the line took a hit. Not enough to register as a fight, not enough to talk about, just enough that, somewhere in her nervous system, something got quietly noted. John Gottman, after watching thousands of couples in his Love Lab at the University of Washington, found that stable couples respond to these tiny experiments. He calls them bids for connection. about 86% of the time. Couples heading for divorce respond about 33% of the time. And the bids that go missing aren't the dramatic ones. They're the small ones, the ones that look like nothing. This is where it starts. Not in the conversations you remember, in the ones you didn't even register as conversations. The second thing that was quietly happening while you weren't noticing has a name. A linguist named Deborah Tannen, who spent her career analyzing how men and women talk differently in long-term relationships, coined two terms that almost every couples therapist now uses: report talk and rapport talk. Men, on average, are trained from childhood to use what Tannen calls report talk. Information transfer, facts, status, solutions. The point of a conversation is to deliver or extract something. When the information is delivered, the conversation is over. Women, on average, are trained to use what she calls rapport talk. The talking is the connection. The content is almost incidental. What matters is the sustained eye contact, the back and forth, the shared rhythm, the feeling of being in something together. The point of the conversation is the conversation. This is why, for years, you might have heard her telling stories that seemed pointless to you. Stories with no climax, no resolution, no take-home message. A long description of her morning, a meandering account of her friend's complicated work situation, a monologue about the weird woman at the post office. To your report talk brain, these conversations had no payload, so you might have nodded along, or pulled out your phone, or interrupted with a solution, or steered the conversation somewhere with a clearer purpose. But for her, the story was never the point. The point was that she was in your presence, with your attention, telling you something. The point was your face responding. The point was the rhythm of being witnessed by you. And every time those conversations got cut short, redirected, or absorbed without acknowledgement, even when you didn't mean to do anything wrong, a microscopic piece of evidence stacked up in her unconscious. A pattern formed. Not a thought she could articulate, just a felt sense. Telling him these things isn't quite worth it. He's somewhere else when I do. Now we have to talk about something specific, something so ordinary that almost no man recognizes it as a relational event. The phone in your hand. There's an entire field of research now studying what's called phubbing, phone snubbing, and a closely related concept called technoference. The work is unambiguous. Across dozens of studies, partner phone use during interactions is linked to lower relationship satisfaction, less perceived intimacy, more conflict, and a specifically painful kind of distress in women who experience it repeatedly. Here's what's important. Most men don't experience their phone use as relational behavior. To you, it's a background activity. You're checking the score. You're scrolling for 30 seconds. You're answering a quick text. You're not doing anything to her. But here's what's happening on her side of the room. She is in the middle of telling you something. She watches your face shift, almost imperceptibly. Your attention is no longer in the conversation. Your eyes are no longer hers. The thing that was happening between you, the line, the rapport, the experimenting connection, just got broken. Not by her, by something neither of you can name in the moment, because to name it would require admitting that what you're scrolling matters more, right now, than what she's saying. Do this 500 times over a year and a half, 1,000 times, 3,000 times. Each one too small to bring up, each one too small to fight about, each one another tiny piece of evidence in the pattern she's not consciously building but can't stop receiving. Any screen wins the competition for his attention. And then, one ordinary Tuesday, she walks into the room with a small story about her day. She opens her mouth. She sees the phone in your hand, and she stops. Not visibly, not in a way you'd notice. She just decides, in a half-second she barely registers herself, that whatever she was about to say isn't worth the risk of being heard incompletely. So she swallows it, and she goes to make tea. Multiply that decision by months, by years, and one day she stops walking into the room at all. Stay with me, because the next piece is the deepest one, and it's the part most men get completely wrong, even when they finally notice the silence. You probably think she stopped telling you things because she's distant, because she's checked out, because she doesn't care anymore. That's not what's happening. Or more accurately, that's the surface of what's happening, but the engine underneath is something else entirely. She's still talking, she's just not talking to you. There's a phenomenon documented in research on women in long-term relationships, particularly in the late stages before separation. The stories that used to come to you start landing somewhere else. The funny thing from work goes to a co-worker. The dream from last night gets told to her sister. The thing she's been wondering about for weeks goes into a text thread with her closest friend. The emotional budget hasn't disappeared, it's been redirected. This is one of the most painful things to understand, but it's important. The reason your wife or partner is quiet at the dinner table isn't that she's run out of things to say. It's that she's already said them. Earlier today, to someone else who, in the small currency that matters, did the simple thing you stopped doing without realizing it. They turned toward her. They asked a follow-up question. They laughed at the right moment. They put down their phone. And here's the part that hurts most. She didn't choose this. She didn't sit down one day and decide to invest her inner life somewhere else. Her nervous system slowly, quietly learned that the safe place to put a small story was somewhere outside this room. And once that pathway formed, it became automatic. So if you want to know what she's not telling you anymore, listen to the small sounds in the house, the phone calls in the bedroom, the long texting sessions while she's cooking, the laughter that comes from somewhere not in front of you. That's where the conversations that used to be yours are happening now. Listen carefully, because the next thing I'm going to do is give you her voice. Not as I imagine it, as researchers and clinicians who work with women in this exact stage of long marriages consistently describe it. Imagine she could tell you, plainly, what was happening on her side. This is what she would say. For a while I tried. I came in with my little stories, and I tried to make them interesting enough that you'd look up. I tried to time them for when you weren't tired. I tried to leave them small so they wouldn't ask too much of you. And every time you gave me half your attention, every time the phone won, every time you nodded without hearing, something inside me made a small adjustment. Not a decision, an adjustment. After a few hundred of those adjustments, the math of telling you something became too lopsided. The cost of being half heard was higher than the comfort of being heard would have been. So I stopped trying. Not to punish you, just to protect myself from the specific kind of loneliness that comes from telling something to someone who's almost listening. I'm not silent because I have nothing to say. I'm silent because I learned that saying it to you costs more than keeping it. That's the voice. That's what the silence at your dinner table is made of. And here's why this matters more than you might think. There's research from Matthias Mehl at the University of Arizona who actually attached recording devices to people throughout their days and analyzed thousands of hours of real-life conversation. What he found is that the amount of substantive conversation in a person's life, the kind of talking where two people are genuinely engaged with each other, not transactional, not logistical, is one of the strongest predictors of well-being he's been able to measure. When she stopped telling you about her day, you didn't just lose a habit. You lost the thing that was knitting the two of you together every single evening. The small daily mechanism by which she was still actively choosing to be in your life. The silence isn't the result of the distance. The silence is the distance, building itself one missed conversation at a time. So here, finally, is the seventh thing. The thing I promised at the beginning. The one that gives you something practical to do tonight, not eventually. There's an experiment you can try, and I want you to do it tonight. Not in a dramatic way, not with announcements, just like this. When she comes into the room, put the phone down. Not face up on the table. not face down within reach. Put it in another room, out of sight. Then look at her and ask her one question. Not, "How was your day?" because that question has been answered with "fine" so many times it doesn't mean anything anymore. Ask her something more specific. Ask her, "Was there anything weird today? Was there a moment that surprised you? Did anyone say something strange?" And then do something almost no man does at the moment a woman in a long marriage opens her mouth. Don't think about your response. Don't think about how to fix anything. Don't think about whether the story is going somewhere. Just listen, the way you used to listen at the very beginning, when every word she said was somehow more interesting than every other word in the world. Watch what happens. Watch whether she opens up after a hesitation. Watch whether she takes a half breath and finds that the muscle of telling you something still works. Watch whether the air in the room changes. If she lights up, if a story comes out, even a small one, even haltingly, you have your answer. The pathway is still there. It needs rebuilding, but the foundation hasn't collapsed. The next several months of you doing this same thing consistently, without making a project of it, will quietly do something most therapy couldn't do faster. If she gives you something short, polite, closed, if she says nothing really and goes back to whatever she was doing, that's also your answer. The pathway has been buried, not erased. The work is longer. The work involves you genuinely understanding that she stopped telling you things because telling you stopped feeling safe. And the only way to reopen that channel is to make it feel safe again, in small, consistent ways, over a much longer period than your impatience will want. But either way, and this matters, the fact that you noticed at all, the fact that you're sitting here trying to understand what happened, is the first real movement in a long time. She probably doesn't know yet that you noticed. You don't have to announce it. You just have to be the man, starting tonight, who sees her when she walks into the room. So when the house is quiet later, and you hear her in the kitchen, doing something small that doesn't matter, wiping the counter, putting the kettle on, looking out the window for a second, get up. Don't make a big deal of it. Don't explain yourself. Just walk in. Lean against the doorframe. Put the phone in your pocket and leave it there. And say to her, "Hey, what was the strangest thing that happened to you today?" And then, whatever she says, and however small it is, and however much it feels like nothing, listen to her like it's everything. Because for years, that's exactly what it was. You just forgot how to hear it.